The next section, which is what, the third section, I guess. So the first chapter here is chapter 9 on human development. For many of you, you might have to take lifespan as part of your degree plan. Lifespan is essentially this whole chapter. So this is an entire course boiled down into one chapter. It's kind of interesting. There's some interesting stuff in it. I like parts of this chapter, but I hate teaching that class. It's a little strong of a word. I probably don't hate it, but it's just that fun. It's kind of boring, especially the beginning part when you're talking about babies and when they start walking and eating and all that kind of stuff. I'm just not a pediatrician. I don't care about that stuff as much. The psychological development is interesting, but I don't feel like we spend enough time talking about that and too much time talking about the biology. So, yeah, this will either be your cup of tea or it won't. But let's knock it out. Let's get to the end because that's talking about parenting styles, and that part I do kind of like. So we're going to talk about theories of development, a couple of the most prominent ones anyway. Prenatal development and infancy, that's mostly biology. I don't like that part. Early and middle childhood, adolescence, that's always interesting. Early and middle adulthood, and then late adulthood. So developmental psychology is the study of how humans grow, develop, and change throughout the lifespan. So as you can see in this picture, this little cartoon of kind of a lifespan, right? Clearly, if you just think physically, right? Obviously a lot of difference between this baby and this child and this preteen and this teen and this adolescent and then this, or maybe adult, and then an older adult and then kind of a senior adult. Physically, there are pretty dramatic differences between all of these things, as you can kind of see in this picture. And of course, you might not think about this very often, but psychologically, there are a lot of things that are different, right? Children don't think the same way as teenagers, and teenagers don't think the same way as adults, and adults, even amongst from early adulthood to middle adulthood to late adulthood, there is a dramatic difference in the way people think. So that's kind of the focus of developmental psychology, is these changes. So there's kind of a little bit of an argument. Is that a continuous change or a discontinuous change? And what that means is, are we kind of constantly evolving, like a little bit at a time, or do we have like a phase that goes on for a period of time, and then there's almost like a demarcation point where like you have an aha moment, and then suddenly you're changing the way that you think. I know that there's been tons of times for me where something occurs and it is kind of an aha moment, and I just kind of instantly change the way that I think. So I think there is a little bit of an argument there for the discontinuous model, although I think most people agree that continual change is probably more appropriate. Again, it's a little bit of an interesting argument if you can think anecdotally in your own life, if there's anything that you might have said or heard or experienced that from that moment on, things were different. Let's see, universal or culture specific. Again, there are universal development things that occur. Babies pretty much at the same age all over the world learn to talk around roughly 10 months. So that's universal. But then culture specifically, in certain cultures, babies walk earlier than in other cultures. Not a whole lot. I mean, we're talking a couple of months, maybe difference, but enough of a difference that it's statistically significant, as they would say. So that's another thing to kind of consider and look at, is when we're talking about developmental psychology. Are we talking about the universal development, or are we talking about our specific culture? Now, that's one of the things about the Lifespan book that I kind of didn't like, is that it focuses mostly on, well, it brings that to a point because it talks about all this information about like when babies do this and that and the other kind of stuff in America, right? Because this is an American book written by an American author, and so it talks about that. But then like the whole second half of the chapter is like, well, in Asia it's like this, and in Africa it's like this, and in Timbuktu it's like this. So I feel like as a student, it's like, oh my God, I gotta remember all of that. Like, which one is on the test? So while I can appreciate that they're emphasizing the differences in different cultures, right? For an intro lifespan class, I just almost felt like it was an overwhelming amount of information. it would have been fine to put, a couple of paragraphs at the end of the chapter just pointing out that, oh, by the way, Japanese babies walk earlier and talk later, and a couple sentences pointing out differences. But I feel like the book, if I remember right, it's been a little while since I've taught it. I remember thinking like, oh my God, there's so much information there. So this is a pretty huge field, kind of depending on what your focus is. Again, we're just going to talk about kind of the main guys. So you can't talk about developmental psychology without talking about the Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget. He is probably the biggest name in this field. Again, just for frame of reference here, we're talking like basically early 1900s, mid 1900s. So he is probably the most pioneering, dominant force in developmental psychology. And if for those of you that may be education majors or go into teaching, in a lot of your education class, you're going to talk about all of his theories. So this is still very modern, very contemporary, very used now. Having said that, a lot of people sort of disagree with some of his time frames, right? Now that could be because as a society we are advancing quicker than we did a couple of generations ago when he proposed these time frames. That's certainly possible. It could be because he was limited by the science of his time, and so his observations now can be made in a little bit better setting, a little bit more scientific, if you will. And so maybe maybe he just missed the mark by just a little bit. So we still talk about his stuff, but we're taking some of his time frames with a grain of salt. Okay. All right. So first of all, he came up with this notion of schemata or schema. It's the same thing, and sometimes people just drop that TA, and it sounds like two different words, but I actually prefer schema. I don't like the schemata. I think of stigmata with the holes in the hands and the feet and the crucifixion stuff. So I don't like confusing that. So you'll hear me say schemas. So a schema is basically a mental framework. It's just a blueprint. So think of like an index card in your brain that basically says dog, and then underneath it, it's got everything you know about dogs, right? 4 legs, furry, tail, man's best friend, chases cats, chases their tail, all these things, right? That is a schema, right? So we'll talk about this way more in the memory chapter. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but we'll revisit this topic in a couple of chapters. So the two big things to remember for schemas are assimilation and accommodation. So assimilation is taking in information that is comparable to what is already known. So you come home with a new puppy, right? And the 3-year-old has never seen that before. What is that, right? Eyes filled with wonder. And you say, doggy, right? And you explain to him doggy and pet and all that. So they feel it and they think furry. So they're adding that to their schema. Like that's on the card. 4 legs, they write that on the card. So furry, 4 legs, perhaps tail, okay, tail, general size, okay, small, okay. That's their schema for dog. Small, tail, furry, 4 legs, right? So a couple years goes by and you bring home a cat. Maybe not a couple years, 6 months. So the baby's still small. You bring home a cat and they say, doggy, because it meets the criteria for what they know to be a dog, right? Small, tail, 4 legs, furry. So they don't understand. So now you have to point out the differences. No. Dog, good. Cat, bad, right? Dog, fun. Cat, kind of a jerk, right? So you point out all the different, by the way, I'm not a cat person. So you point out all of the differences. So that's taking in information that's comparable to what is already known. I'm comparing this new information to what I already have. And I realize, oh, wait, I need to assimilate this new information. I need a new card. Now I have one for dog and one for cat, or a new schema. So that's assimilating. Accommodating is changing the schema based on new information. So you pull out dog, right, and you have small on there, right, because the dog that you have is small. And then they come home, or your neighbor maybe gets a Great Dane. And now, whoa, what is this, a horse, right? I don't know if you've ever seen a full-size Great Dane. They're huge. So now you have to go to that schema for dog and you have to accommodate. You maybe scratch off small and you put, well, relatively small, right? There's some that are small, some that are medium, some that are quite large. So that's accommodation. So assimilation is basically a new schema with new information compared to what you already know, because you can't put this new information on any existing schema, right? It's a new experience, completely new, so it needs its own schema. That's assimilation. Accommodation, again, you take the card, you add something to it, right? You change information. Maybe you have something on there that's not correct, and so you scratch that off and correct it with what you accommodate that with whatever new information. So um, now this is kind of a big deal. This is definitely a test question, so pay attention to this one. Changes in schemas underlie 4 distinct stages of cognitive development. So um, we'll talk about all 4 of those stages here in a second, right? These stages of development are kind of based on certain milestones and ways of thinking, and they kind of roughly go by those age groups that I told you he assigned that is a little bit in controversy today. So that's the stages of development that we're going to talk about in a second. But know these 3 things about the 4 stages that we're about to talk about. First of all, each stage is qualitatively different way in reasoning and understanding, right? So a very young child thinks qualitatively different than an older child, right? A person in the next stage. There is something about the quality of their thinking that is just not so. If you have a little brother or a little sister, I'm guessing many of you don't have children yet, but their notion of fairness comes to mind, right? What's fair, what's not fair. I actually was talking about this earlier today. So I have 2 children, and they're only 2 years apart, so they're intellectually pretty close to each other, developmentally. So let's say that one child comes down and has a quick dinner and then starts on dessert, which I'm fine with, right? Second kid comes down and sees first kid eating dessert and says, I want pie or whatever. And you say, well, you have to eat dinner first. And they say, well, that's not fair. She's eating pie. Okay, in their way of thinking, they're eating pie. I should be able to eat pie. And you're telling me no, but you told her yes. That's not fair, because they're unable to see past right now. They didn't see 10 minutes ago when they finished off their dinner. And so you tell them, well, you need to eat dinner first because that's what she did, and then you can have dessert after that because that's what she did. And surprisingly, you'll get an argument out of that. They don't think that that's fair. Clearly as an adult, right, we can see the fairness there, right? No, you both have dinner, you both have dessert. It just happened at a different time, but you're still doing the same thing to get the same, reward, if you will. So you'll notice that there'll be a qualitatively different way in thinking between these different stages. The ability to kind of think beyond themselves, right? Another thing is that they occur in a universally fixed order. Asian babies, African babies, European babies, American babies, it doesn't matter, Canadian babies, whatever, they go through these 4 stages, all right? So they are not culture specific, they are universal, right? Every baby thinks these kind of rudimentary ways, and then it evolves into the next stage and the next stage and so on. And the last one is that these changes are gradual and that they are dependent upon the child. Some of them navigate these changes quite quickly, and very distinctly, and then other times it's like a slow. They're starting to get it. It's like anything else, right? I mean, think about this class, for instance. There's people that are making hundreds. There's people that with low Bs, and it's not to say one person's better than the other, right? But some people just assimilate information quicker. They're able to regurgitate onto a 4-question multiple choice test the right answer quicker. Some people take an hour to take the test. Some people take 30 minutes. So and we all have our strengths and weaknesses, right? And it's the same thing with this, right? Every child adapts at their own rate based on a number of factors. So those are the 3 big kind of key points, right? That they're qualitatively different way of thinking, so they're very dissimilar to each other, that they occur in a specific fixed order universally, and that the changes are gradual, okay? Moving on. All right, so this is the first stage. The first stage is called the sensory motor stage. And the reason that it's called that is because that's kind of the big thing that's driving this new baby, right? From birth to 2 years old, roughly 2 years old. So they're developing their senses, right? their sense of sight, their sense of smell, their sense of taste, all of our five senses that we've talked about in the sensation chapter, they're not all developed at the same rate, right? They have their sense of taste is somewhat underdeveloped, right? They can really taste two major flavors, which is sweet and umami. And that's interesting because I don't know this, just for the record, even though I have had two kids, I don't know this firsthand, so let me just go on record saying that. But apparently breast milk is, it's very hearty, and so you have that umami flavor, and it's also supposedly very sweet. So that makes sense that from an evolutionary perspective, that those are the two big flavors, I guess, that babies start off being able to taste. So the bitter, the salty, all of that, they don't really have that ability to taste, to differentiate those flavors quite yet. So sense of taste, very underdeveloped. Sense of sight, very underdeveloped. Babies do not have 20/20 vision whenever they're born. They're very, very nearsighted. Things have to be very, very close proximity because, again, they're still sort of maturing that. But their sense of hearing, much better. Not perfect, but not bad. We talked about that cross-modal perception before, where you hear a sound over here and you can hear it. You can sort of echolocate where that sound came from and look towards it. They're still developing that. So all of their senses are still developing, and also their motor skills. Obviously, babies don't come out being able to do gymnastics. So he coined the phrase sensory motor because they're gaining an understanding of the world through their senses and through their motor activity. So when it first starts off, you can't hand them anything, they can't grasp. You can put your finger in their palm and they might close their fingers, but that's a reflex. Okay, that's not a learned behavior. That's a reflex, and you can trigger that reflex over and over until they start to learn it. Just like blinking is involuntary, right? But it also can be voluntary. I can close my eyes and open them, and close them and open them, or if I want to be creepy, I can wink at you, right? So it's involuntary, but it also can be voluntary. It's the same thing with this. There's a lot of motor things that are reflexive in nature, but then through time, they're like, oh, that's useful. I'm going to do that from now on. So they crawl, and then they walk, and things like that. So one of the big milestones of this sensory motor stage is this notion of object permanence. Now, I thought about putting them up here and playing them and talking over the video, but I think it'd be better if you just watch the video, and I'll set it up now. So hopefully for those of you that are watching these videos you'll get more out of them. But I'm going to put the video links for these chapters up. Make sure that you check out the one specifically. There's this little kid, if I can find the link, if I can find it, and they're conducting this experiment. Now, he's not in the sensory motor stage. He's a little bit older, but they talk to him. Actually, I'm sorry. Let me hold off on talking about him till the next stage because I don't want it to get confusing. So sorry about that. I'm getting ahead of myself. So the object permanence, let's talk about that one first. So I'll probably have a video about that one too. I'll have to find one though. This kind of blew my mind when I first heard about this because it doesn't seem like that would be a thing, right? It's the realization that objects continue to exist even when they can no longer be perceived. So what Piaget discovered was that if a baby can't see it, then they don't believe that it exists, even if it just existed a minute ago. Because again, they're relying on their senses for everything. And if they can see it exists, and obviously the logical thing in an immature brain is if I can't see it, it doesn't exist. So the way that he figured that out was they would put a toy and the baby would play with it, and then they would take the toy and they would just move it right behind a screen. So all the baby had to do was reach around behind it and grab it. But the screen would go down in front of the baby. They could see the screen come down and block their view of the toy. And they might look around a little bit like, hey, what just happened? Where'd that go, right? Doesn't exist anymore. Then they would take it and they would just cover it with a piece of cloth. Now, babies in this first sensory motor stage, right up to 2 years old, don't just move the cloth and take the toy even though they want it. They would sit there and they would cry because they don't have the toy anymore. Clearly they want it, and it's right there within their reach. They just don't get it. Now, one of the arguments against this is that they lack the motor skills, the fine motor skills, the manipulation of their fingers to grab that blanket and move it out of the way or to reach around an object. They just don't have that fine motor coordination. So it's not that they don't understand that it still exists. They see that it exists, but they can't get to it. They know their limitation, and that's the reason that they don't go for it. Now that's one argument against this, but I think for the most part, this notion of object permanence is pretty readily accepted. So that's part of the reason that babies like to play peekaboo. So you cover your head, or your face rather, you no longer exist, because this is a person to a baby, right? Not this, it's just the face, because that's what they're cued on. That's what they look at. That's where the sound comes from, right? There's a lot of, especially when you're talking to a baby, right? And you do that baby talk where you're talking all crazy, right? There's a lot of facial feature stuff going on there, right? You're over exaggerating it, so they start to focus on that. So when you cover your face, you no longer exist, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere, you do this and you exist again, and that's exciting for them. So try to play peekaboo with, a 2-year-old, and you're going to get a lot of laughs. Try to play peekaboo with a 15-year-old, and you're going to be creepy, right? And the reason for that is, again, in this earlier stage, it's a qualitatively different way of thinking, so they don't get that. The next thing is stranger anxiety. We'll talk more about with Mary Ainsworth a little later. But in Piaget's sensory motor stage, they cannot assimilate the stranger into existing schemas, right? Baby knows I got mom that cares for me every time I cry. I got dad maybe that cares for me every time I cry. These people exist, but then you bring in a new person. And who the heck is that? I have no idea who that is. And I can't wrap my head around it, right? They don't do anything for me. And I don't know who they are. I can't accommodate them because of my schemas are for people. I have like 2, right? So if I have this third person, I can't properly assimilate who this is and why they exist and what they're here for. And that creates an anxiety. And that's the reason that we have babies crying around strangers. So that was kind of his notion of why babies cry around basically non-threatening new people. All right. Next stage is the pre-operational stage. Now, you'll notice this first stage is only 2 years, right? From birth to 2. Now, check out this next stage, from 2 to 7, right? Almost 2.5 times longer. So these stages are not the same length of time. And the reason for that is the rate at which we develop. We don't develop, again, continually, right? We develop kind of on a bell curve, right? We start to develop, and then we like shoot way up, and then we kind of peak, and then we kind of slowly, I guess it wouldn't be a bell curve because it doesn't necessarily come back down, right? But the rate at which we're developing, however you chose to measure that, would sort of level off at a certain point. All right, so the big things for this one, and this is the one that were the video, the really good video, right? There's this blonde girl with a ponytail, looks like a college grad student, I think, and she's talking with this little boy. This little boy is the cutest thing ever, right? I mean, it's just absolutely adorable. And he is absolutely smart for his age. Very, very pleasant little boy. Great manners, very, very intelligent. He's really into this. I mean, he's not at all distracted. And you'll probably be surprised by some of his answers. So she'll do some things where she'll lay out some quarters, like 5 quarters, and then in 2 rows, and she'll say, "Are they the same? Are there the same number of quarters in both rows?" And he'll be like, "Yeah." And then she'll stretch out the bottom row of quarters, so it's longer line, and she goes right in front of him. She didn't take anything away or add anything. And she'll ask him again, which one has more quarters? And he'll look at the longer one, immediately go, "That one has more." Well, I didn't add any more. I just stretched it out, right? She'll take 2 sticks that are the same length and say, "Which one's longer?" And he'll say, "They're the same." And then she'll slide them like they're here, and she'll slide them like this. And she'll say, "Which one's longer?" And he'll point to one of them and say, "That one's longer," because it goes out further, even though it starts further over. So you'll see a lot of those kinds of things. He is probably a lot of that is in this concrete operation stage. So anyway, symbolic function is the understanding that one thing, right, an object or a word or a drawing, can actually stand for something else. So this is accomplished through a couple of different things, right? Experience. being taught that, right? We can teach our children, so of course we can educate them. And then through self-discovery, they can kind of learn on their own through pretend play, right? So they might want to play cars, but they don't have any, or maybe they're upstairs and they don't feel like going and getting them, so there's a block, and they might move the block around on the floor and pretend that it's a car, right? So this block can be a car, or little girls that play with a doll, they pretend that it's a real baby. So the doll represents a real baby. Little boys get a stick that's shaped like a gun and they run around pew 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 pew. Right? It's a gun. It's not a stick. So one thing can stand for something else. It can look like something else, and it can be used for a different purpose. Another thing, I read one time. I remember reading a story about this. This little boy would look and he would see his dad's suitcase would be by the front door, and the suitcase would indicate that dad's home, or he would get up and suitcase is gone. He would know dad's at work. So that suitcase sort of became symbolic for dad. You know, that is dad. He's either home or he's not home. And to be able to deduce that, occurs during this stage. That would be something that, for instance, a 2-year-old would not be able to deduce. And of course, between 7 and 11, you would sort of fully expect, if you look out and the car's in the driveway and the suitcase is there, dad's home somewhere, right? So that kind of begins in this pre-operational stage. One big thing about this is this particular stage is you'll notice egocentrism. That's just self-centered. That's what that literally translates to, right? So children tend to believe that everyone sees what they see and they feel what they feel and they think what they think. They're unable to understand somebody else's perspective. Okay, they can't agree to disagree and say, well, I think this way and you think that way. That doesn't make sense, right? They think everybody thinks the same. There's no reason at this particular stage in life for them to understand that people can see something and interpret it in multiple ways. Now, there's a lot of this chapter that I actually kind of don't agree with, but honestly, I haven't done the research to be able to, stand on academics and say that. But I think from a personal perspective, I don't see that in my children. Now, my children are, and I'm going to brag like everybody does about their own kids, right? But my children are both highly intelligent. They both have been tested. I'm not just saying that, and they're way up there. So I don't see this as much in my children. And another thing, and I have read this research about this, is that one of the things that tends to speed this along a little bit, that helps developmentally, especially in this stage, is religion. And I'm not a particularly religious person, but my ex-wife is a Bible-thumping, holy rolling. She's going to be like the queen of heaven someday when she gets there, right? Because she pretty much runs the show. That's how she is. And she has raised them to be very, very, very religious. They go to church like 3 times a week or something. So when you're hearing the lessons in, the Christian lessons in Sunday school, right? It's always about being selfless and, helping others and, all of that sort of thinking. And it takes the self out of it, right? You should be a servant of God. You should be a servant of your fellow man. And so you're teaching at a very young age, if you have your children there, to kind of get past this natural tendency for egocentrism. So it only makes sense, like I said before, right? You can learn through self-discovery, you can learn through education, you can learn through experience, that kind of how to advance to the next stage. And all of that comes into play for these little children. And so I have not noticed this to be a dominant theme in my kids. Now, of course, they're very selfish, right? Like all little kids are. But I see a little bit less of it than I think you might in your average kid. So I think that's kind of an interesting, shout out for religion, right? Something that it teaches beyond the spiritual, in a very sort of material way, and very, what's the word I'm looking for? Can't think of the word. I'll think of it in a second. But it's it translates to just living in society, just like talking about heaven and earth. So this egocentrism, though, is part of this pre-operational stage here. And the last thing is that thinking about objects is dominated by appearances. So my favorite one is whenever you give 2 cookies to child number 1, right? But there's only 3. So then child number 1 gets 1. What are they going to do? They're going to cry, right? They're going to lose their mind. So you take that 1 right back from them and right in front of them, break it in half, and you hand them both pieces, and now they think they got 2 because they can count 1, 2. Even though collectively, if you put it back together, it equals 1 to their 2. So it's half as much, quite obviously. They'll think, oh, now there's 2. And you'll see that in the video. She does something like that with a graham cracker, and she'll break up a graham cracker into multiple pieces and then ask him, like, which one's more, and he'll say that one's more. So that's the one that they'll choose. So you can really mess with kids by, breaking their food up and telling them how much more they ate or whatever. It's kind of fun to watch them, try to logic that through. Next stage, the concrete operations stage. This is between 7, and then now we start to get a very rough end point, right? Now we're starting to really see the differences in individual children, right? Again, some mature a little quicker, some take a little longer. He considered all of this age range to be very normal. We see kids now earlier, like sometimes even 9, that are very advanced. 10 years old is not particularly uncommon to sort of see a lot of the evidence of the stages of thinking. So again, his time frames may be shifting to the left just a little bit younger. Did he get it wrong? Have we advanced as a society? There's many arguments for that. Development of more abstract ways to think, including conservation. Conservation is the concept that a given quantity of matter remains the same despite being rearranged. So I did notice this in my kids. They both had, my son had a Marvel glass that he really liked, and then my daughter had like a Barbie glass, right? And so they were different sizes. And so I would take Capri Suns. So there was a thing, they used to drink the hell out of Capri Suns. And there was this thing going around for a while where somebody was drinking one and it tasted like kind of off. They have the silver pouches, right? So they cut open the pouch and they poured it into a glass, and it was full of mold. They put these drinks in these pouches and they seal them up. There's a little bit of air in there. And sometimes these sit in the warehouse for God knows how long before they go to the grocery store and then sit on that shelf for God knows how long. And, it's a little unnerving to think of how many times I've had a Capri Sun or given them to my children and I can't see what I'm drinking. That's kind of strange, right? So it was this big thing. So it got to the point where I would always cut the Capri Sun and pour it into the glass so that way I can check it. Now I think they make the back of the pouch clear for that reason. So now you can kind of look and see what you got. But when I would pour these Capri Sun, they would see me cut open the Capri Sun and pour it into the glass. But the levels of the glass would be different because the diameter was different. And they just could, she got more than I did. And you try to explain it. You saw me take 2 Capri Sun pouches and cut the tops and pour them at the same time till they were both empty. You both got the same amount. Look at her glass, there's more. And you can't logically deduce that to a child in this stage, right? If they haven't reached this stage yet. So this is kind of an interesting thing that I have seen. You'll see this in the video. And one of the things of note in the video is when she pours, there's 2 glasses next to each other, and she's like, tell me when they're both the same. And he'll put his hand in between the glasses to try to use it as a level between this glass and this glass. I mean, that's pretty smart. This kid is really, really smart. And then gets the answer wrong every time, because he hasn't reached this maturation of psychological development yet. Another concept here is reversibility. The realization that any change in the shape, position, or order of matter can be reversed mentally. So again, you'll see that with the quarters, or the 2 sticks that she just shifts one to the left a little bit. It's just a change in position, and it can be undone, and they don't sometimes get that. The last stage here is the formal operation stage. This is, again, roughly 11, 12-ish, somewhere in that ballpark, and then this is the last stage. So Piaget stopped here. He was a child psychologist, a child development psychologist. So once it got to about 12, as far as Piaget was concerned, that's it, right? From there on, not interested. That's one of the critiques against him is that, he got all those early years and all those important things, but and I actually respect him for this, he kind of said, okay, look, you can't be an expert on everything, right? There's so many stages that we go through. I can either be, know a lot about a lot of them, or I can know everything about the first part of life. And he stopped there, and I kind of respect that. I think that's pretty cool that he poured all of his thoughts and energy and experiments and time and efforts and theories into like the first 12 years of life, and then after that, basically was like, yeah, I'm gonna let somebody else deal with that. So at this stage, that's when they start to develop a sort of deductive reasoning ability, the ability to base logical reasoning on hypothetical premises. So thinking through, like, say, consequences of actions. Well, if I do this, that might happen. Or reverse that. I don't want this to happen to me, so I better do this behavior. That is a very much mature, I guess, comparatively speaking, way of thinking, a comprehension of abstract concepts. So again, religion is completely abstract, right? Can't see it, can't touch it, can't feel it, can't, well, somebody would argue you can feel it, but you can't see it, you can't observe it in any kind of scientific manner. So it is completely abstract. And when children understand that at an early age through these stories, they can't fully understand it like an adult, but they start to play around with the notion of abstract concepts. And so then when you start to introduce other abstract concepts, mathematical reasoning, for instance, what you see sometimes is a slightly quicker adaptability with children that have religious backgrounds. So again, just a little bit of research on that topic that I read that I thought was pretty interesting. Maybe pretty happy that my children are raised in that concept. Formulation of their own theories about politics, philosophy, religion is very. I love talking to my 13-year-old. He has his own theories, not on politics so much, but maybe a little bit actually. A little bit. He's got his own phone now, so he's on the internet. And he watches YouTube videos, and I've turned him on to a few. I'm a fan of Ben Shapiro. I think he's a brilliant, brilliant guy. I just respect his debate prowess. And he watched a few of those videos and now has gone on his own and watched some more. So I think I've turned my son into a conservative. But anyway, he's got his own thoughts on some of the stuff that you can talk to him about current events, Black Lives Matter movements, the protests that are going on all over the world, police shootings. He actually has opinions on all this stuff. And I'm not saying that he's right, by the way. He's not on a lot of it. But it's interesting to me how concrete he is in his stance and whatever it might be. So yeah, I definitely start to see like a different way of thinking. I could have these conversations with him 2 years ago, right? I can't have these conversations with my daughter yet. So, she just kind of goes with the flow right now because she's a child and that's what she does. But my son has kind of reached that point where he's becoming his own person a little bit. So he realizes, you have to sort of adopt your own way of thinking. So very, very different way of thinking. And so that's what I mean by this last one. So there's a very big difference in having the ability to think in the abstract, which at this point my daughter is just dabbling with a little bit, right? She can't do it greatly, but she can do it a little bit. My son can do it a little bit better, but I'm not saying just because he can do it, he thinks correctly, right? Some of his abstract ways of thinking are completely wrong. But still, it's a process, right? So, he's a little further along as he's 2 years older, but, he's getting there. So, all right, so that's it for Piaget. Again, these chapters and intro are broken down so quickly. It covers the stuff. You could take an entire course on just Piaget. There are so many nuances to these that these couple of bullets really don't even do these theories justice. These get really, really deep. So, thank me for not loving this chapter enough to go into more detail than this. A couple more, I guess there's a few more things here. This naive idealism, right? A type of thought in which adolescents construct ideal solutions for problems. And the funny part about this is kind of what I mean by the problem with growing up in an information age, right? Is that information is at your fingertips everywhere, right? But to not fully understand life yet and to think you have all the answers is like the worst thing. That's what makes teenagers suck so bad. Early teenagers, not you guys. You guys are awesome, I guess. I don't know. So, I remember one time there was this 14-year-old kid that I actually kind of didn't like very much. And I was at a place where I was between jobs, changing careers, and then my car went out, totally unexpected. And so I was a little bit worried, financially, and I kind of expressed that, and he was like, "Just buy a new car." And I was like, "Yeah, well, that's the problem is I don't have money to buy a new car right now because we get a job." I'm like, "Okay, I'm looking for one, but I haven't found one yet." And he was like, "Grocery store's hiring." Yeah, but I can't make any money working bagging groceries. I mean, not enough to pay my bills and a new car. Just get a cheaper car. No, no, I don't think you understand. So what bothered me about the conversation was the arrogance, right? It wasn't just dumb, like I got the answer. It was just that arrogance that I was an idiot and that he had all of the answers. Just get a new car, just do this, just do that. That's not the way the world works, right? But because of his complete lack of knowledge of how the real world operates, and his inability to understand, the situation, it seemed pretty cut and dry. You need a car, buy a car. You need a job, find a job. I mean, it's black and white, right? So you'll see this kind of thinking in early teens, right? They think they have the answer because now they have the ability to deduce logically, and logically, if you need a car, you buy a car. It's that simple, right? But there are extenuating circumstances, right? There are taxes, there are credit issues, there are, all kinds of issues that play into it that they're just unfamiliar with. So you'll see this naive idealism. Now, we had that egocentrism back, where was it? Back here, right? This 2 to 7, where they can't relate to other people and how they think differently, right? Because everybody thinks the same. Well, then we kind of get out of that and we start to understand that other people can think differently, but now we kind of revisit this notion of egocentrism with adolescents, right? They become very, very selfish. They don't think about others, right? Because pretty much their whole life they've been under mom and dad's rule, right? Now when we get to this age, we start to kind of branch out and become our own person to some extent. So there is kind of a necessity that they think of themselves, right? But they usually go too far with it and they put themselves over everybody else. And unless you really did just a bang up job raising this kid, most kids are going to go through this phase where they are very, very selfish. They don't think about anybody else. They drink out of the milk carton. They don't get a glass. They don't clean up after themselves. If there's 3 pieces of pizza left and you've only had one and they've already had 5, they're going to hurry up and eat those 3 pieces of pizza because they're still hungry. They're not going to count the slices and divvy them up equally, right? They're thinking, I'm still hungry and I want that pizza. So again, there's a little bit of wiggle room there depending on, sort of their moral compass and how they've been raised and how early did you get them on the track to recognize this and sort of fight against it? Because this is a very natural developmental stage. Most kids go through it completely oblivious and unaware. But again, with certain upbringing, especially religious upbringing, this can sort of be recognized at an earlier age. So, all right. Last 2 things here, this notion of something called the imaginary audience. This is a belief by adolescents that they are or that they will be the center of attention in all social situations, and that all others will be as critical or as approving, but usually it's critical, as they are of themselves. So it's just like when you see a picture of yourself and you think like, ugh, my left dimple in my cheek is like, it looks like a big dent in my face. That's ugly, right? Like you're super critical about something that other people either wouldn't notice or they think it's cute, right? But we are so critical of ourselves. That is this notion, but like on steroids times 10 plus 3, right? It's imaginary audience for kids are that when I sit down at like now if I was eating a hot dog and like 1 drop of mustard got on my shirt and then I needed to do a video, honestly, I might not even change shirts. I'd be like, oh, excuse the mustard. Anyway, and I'd go right on, right? Because I don't care. We've all dripped something on us at some point. It's not the end of the world. It doesn't mean I'm an idiot. It means, whoops, too much mustard on that. Whatever, not a big deal, and I move on about my day. A kid in this formal operation stage, right? They might think this might as well be a spotlight beacon to the world, and everybody in the classroom is going to see it and make fun of it and and think like what an idiot you are, and you don't know how to eat. What's wrong with you? And they make such a big deal about that kind of stuff, right? Because again, they think that everything is being judged because they are starting to be able to judge other people, and so they, of course, naturally think people are judging them. So you'll see this imaginary audience behavior where they'll spend hours rehearsing in the mirror things that they would say in certain situations, talking to themselves. I remember one time there was this like 13-year-old girl, and she was rehearsing in the mirror, and she was mortified because she was sitting at lunch, and this song came on. Somebody had their music playing on their phone or something, and it was that Whippin' Nene song. Remember that, right? And everybody at the table started doing the dance, the Whippin' Nene thing, right? Whatever the dance is that goes with that, and she didn't know it. And everyone was having a good time and laughing and doing their own thing, and nobody paid attention to the fact that she didn't know that dance, but she lost her mind. She was mortally embarrassed and could just die because she didn't know the words and she didn't know the dance, and so she came straight home. Screw homework, I'm going to practice this dance because if that ever happens again, I don't ever want to be caught not knowing how to do this popular dance and all that kind of stuff. That is an imaginary audience. Nobody even noticed that you don't know that. Nobody's going to judge you based on something silly like that, right? They might think, you don't know it, haha. That's just kids being jerks, right? But that's not an indictment of your character for all time, right? So again, there's kind of a lot of research going into this imaginary audience notion, like where it comes from psychologically and all that kind of stuff. Kind of an interesting read, but beyond the scope of this class. Last thing here is personal fable. This is an exaggerated sense of personal uniqueness and indestructibility. Everybody thinks that every kid, early teen or whatever, thinks that they are impervious to everything, right? I can do drugs, I won't get addicted. I can do drugs, I'm not going to get arrested. I can steal that, I won't get caught. Teen pregnancy, I don't need birth control. We'll cross our fingers and hope, that'll prevent a baby. That's why you see reckless behavior. Part of the reason, this is one of the theories, by the way, there are other reasons psychologically, but for whatever reason, some adolescents believe that these risks are okay because it's not going to apply to them. I remember whenever I was 17, I think it was 17, there was a job that came open through my dad's company down in Clear Lake next to NASA, and it's I think currently the largest indoor water tank in the world. And it's where the astronauts do some of their weightlessness training. But this was just a big empty building whenever I started. So there's these two rails that go along this way, and there's these huge cranes that move back and forth on these rails. And ultimately, they built this huge facility and filled it with hundreds of millions of gallons of water, and then the cranes operate whatever they do. I don't know. But it was a huge 6-story tall empty building whenever I was there. And they needed somebody to sweep off the cranes. And nobody would do it because there's nothing to clip on safety harness to. And so there was issues about that. But there was like inches of dust because it had been months. And they needed to be painted, so they had to be cleaned first. And I have no problem with heights. So I was like, I'll do it. And they were like, really? And I was like, yeah. So I walked up the rail. I could kind of reach out and kind of touch the wall, but I'm 6 floors up, and I'm walking down a rail to step onto the crane with a push broom, and then I'm sitting there just sweeping. I spent half a day up there just sweeping, not tied off onto anything or whatever, until they went to bring the other crane closer to me. And so they're driving it down this way, right? And I don't know how, but I didn't even see it coming. And those things don't stop on a dime. So as it was slowing, it bumped the one that I was on. And again, somehow I didn't see this thing come. I think maybe I did see it start moving, and I thought, man, that's moving super slow. I'll turn my attention to it again in a minute. I'm finishing up here. And when I went back to do what I was doing, it bumped me, and I wobbled, and I started to fall. And I reached up, and I grabbed above me. There was a rafter in the ceiling that I could just barely with my fingertips grab, and it let me steady myself. But I dropped my broom, and it fell 6 floors, hit the ground, and just exploded, just broke in half. And I was like, oh, man, that was cool, man. That was awesome, right? And I jumped over to the other crane, and I couldn't clean it because I didn't have a broom, but I had no problem with it. I rode it back down. I went down and got another broom, went right back up, and went back to work. And that's crazy. I think about that now, and I'm like, I'm an idiot. What the hell is wrong with me, right? But I just thought, this crane is about as wide as a lane of traffic. It's not like I'm walking a tightrope up there, right? I mean, what are the chances that I'm going to slip and fall, right? I'm going to be fine. Would I do that now? Hell no, right? Because I'm not an idiot like I was back then. So, yeah, I'm a little bit familiar with this, sense of personal uniqueness, right? Like I'm unafraid and I have good balance and reflexes and all that kind of stuff. It's pure luck that I'm not dead right now at 17 from falling a 6-story fall to do some stupid task that everybody else was smart enough to pass on. So, yeah, we all probably have our personal fable that we can think back and something that we did because we thought we could, but we look back now and we're like, oh man, I was dumb. I was a dumb teenager, right? All right, moving on. All right, I'm going to go through this one a little quicker. Kohlberg's theory of moral development. It's interesting, but it's kind of garbage. So I like the topic. I don't like this particular theory. But it's interesting that Kohlberg studied this to begin with, so we'll give him some credit for that. So the way this is broken down, so you understand it, there's 3 levels, and every level has 2 stages. So there's 6 stages total. So there's pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional. You can't mess that up, right? Pre, regular, and then post. Pretty simple. And then there's stage 1, stage 2, and then there's stage 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6. Okay? So running through these really quickly, Kohlberg's level of moral development, in which moral reasoning is based on the physical consequences of an act. So what is right and what is wrong, right? How do you determine right from wrong? Well, remember Freud, we talked about the superego and that rule book of right and wrong. He's not going to use those terms, like those Freudian terms, right? But we're talking about right and wrong. Well, he says that early on, from birth, we determine what is right by whatever avoids punishment. So if I do something in front of other people and I don't get punished for it, well, then it's right. That's a very rudimentary way of thinking, right? What if I know, like for instance, I worked in a prison, right, for 3 years whenever I was in college. Now in college, you're not supposed to bring anything into the prison. You can't bring a book, for instance. But every day, because it's a boring job, I would sneak a book. I'd tuck it into my shirt, right? Tuck in my shirt over it, and I'd sneak a book in. And then whenever I got to the run, wherever I was working, because they were doing their own thing, right? They're all kind of wandering around the day room and wandering in and out. It was a minimum security, so they're not locked up in their cells. They're locked up in their run, which is 5 stories tall, and it was like 19 cells per run, and they're just walking all over the place. And so I would go up to the top floor, and I'd sit on a trash can, and I'd pull out my book, and I would read my book. Inmates would walk up to me and ask me questions. I'd give them answers. They'd walk off. My boss liked me, so I wouldn't cause. Now there were other officers, correctional officers, that would walk up and down the runs, and they would toss cells, and they would find this inmate gave that one a peppermint stick, and so they'd write him up because that's considered trafficking and trading, and inmates are not allowed to do that. And now the inmate's mad at the officer, and he's going to file a grievance, and so they're doing their job, but like kind of stirring stuff up, right? Me, on the other hand, y'all can do whatever you're going to do as long as you're not fighting or screwing or killing each other. I don't really care. And then I'd go sit on my trash can, and I'm just there in case something breaks out, which hardly ever happened. So my boss didn't say anything about it. The inmates didn't say anything about it. I'm not doing anything wrong, right? What if the warden sees me? Probably fired, right? Certainly written up. So, that's a very pre-conventional way of thinking, right? I'm not getting punished for it, so it's not wrong. That's kind of the first example for some reason that pops into my head about it. It's avoiding punishment, so it's not wrong. But now I can look a little older, a little wiser, a little more experienced, and I can say, well, yeah, it was wrong. I mean, I was getting paid to do a job, and I essentially wasn't doing that job. So was that wrong? Yeah, I was totally, morally speaking, that was wrong. I should not be doing that. And now, shoes on the other foot. I'm a little older. I work with mostly people that are like the like the forklift operators and the down stackers and the receivers and all the guys that work on the dock and everything in the warehouse. I mean, I see them cutting corners and taking like unauthorized breaks and all that kind of stuff. And, I want to be like, hey, you need to get to work because you're getting paid right now. But then I think, well, when I was 20, I was doing that too. Right. That's a testament to this level of moral development increasing as we age. Right. We start off kind of rudimentary thinking, and then as you age, you kind of your moral development occurs, and we advance. So stage 2 is so this one just avoids punishment, and the stage 1, if you do something and you get rewarded, somebody gives you a good job or smiles even or whatever, there's some affirmation, then that must be the right thing to do too. Now, is that always true? If an inmate sees me sitting up there on that trash can reading a book and he goes, easy money, and walks away, that's an affirmation that what I'm doing is right, but does it make it right? No, that's a convict telling me that he appreciates the fact that I'm not doing my job, right? So, take that with a grain of salt. But pre-conventional is this very basic, if you don't get punished, then it's not wrong. Then we move into the second stage, the conventional level. In this stage, right and wrong is based on internalized standards of others. This is that superego book that we developed. Right is whatever helps or is approved of by others, or whatever is consistent with the laws of society. So I actually have a graphic here that I like a little bit better. So look at this a little bit more. So the conventional, this is where most adults and adolescents start and adults basically end up. These are the stages. So this first stage here, being good is whatever pleases others. The child adopts a conformist attitude to morality. Right and wrong are determined by the majority. So, for instance, seatbelts. What do you think about seatbelts in cars? Should cops be able to write you a ticket for not wearing your seatbelt? It happens all the time, right? We just accept it. Where did that come from? Well, insurance companies want to keep all the money that they can, right? So if you get into an accident and you're wearing a seatbelt, you're probably going to have less injuries. Okay, that's just proven. If you're in a car and you're in a car accident and no seatbelt, you're going to go through the windshield. You might die, right? You might get severely injured, and your medical bills are going to be astronomical in comparison. So insurance companies don't want to pay for that, so they lobbied, and they had it made into law to where a police officer now has to tell you have to wear a seatbelt because I don't want this insurance company to have to pay too much. But then at the same time, we allow motorcycles to operate. Explain that to me. Clearly, if they get into an accident of any kind, there's going to be more injuries than if they were in a car. What about the fact that it's this whole like, oh, well, as a police officer, I have the duty to keep you safe. Really? So I can write you a ticket for not wearing a seatbelt in a car going 30 miles an hour, right? But you're on your way to going skydiving or, X Games motocross kind of thing, right? So, I mean, clearly I'm not policing your every moment and making sure that you're not doing daredevil stuff, right? It's okay for you to go out and risk your life doing these, sports or, whatever, hobbies, but you have to wear a seatbelt in the car? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, right? So I know a lot of police officers that write that ticket left and right every time they see somebody with no seatbelt on, and they think that they're morally right. They're morally justified. I think if you dig a little deeper and you see that was all born from insurance companies' greed, wanting to, keep more money in their pocket or whatever, then I'm like, no. I think insurance companies make too much money as it is. They charge too much money as it is, and I'm not going to help them with that. I've never written a seatbelt ticket in my life. If you don't want to wear a seatbelt, I don't care if you go through the windshield. I don't know you. Now, do my kids wear a seatbelt? Yes, because I love them and I don't want them to be hurt. So there's a little difference, right? I mean, I as a police officer, your business is your business, and I'm not going to step in and tell you what to do, but I also have a job to do to enforce the laws. So there is a little bit of discretion, right, where I don't think that that's morally justifiable. Just like I know a lot of police officers nowadays that won't enforce city ordinances about wearing masks. They're like, look, if you don't want to wear masks and the store wants to kick you out and you say no, well, we're peace officers, right? I'm going to keep the peace, so I'm going to escort you out of the building, but I'm not going to write you a citation for, not wearing a mask because, I mean, I don't think that government should tell you to wear a mask. And you have, of course, other people that are like, oh, it's the law and you have to wear it. So that's kind of what this whole thing is about, this moral development, kind of where are you, numerically. I'll let you read through kind of the rest of this. I don't need to go through all of them. They're not going to be like super tough questions on the test about this stuff, so I'm going to try to skip it. This is some interesting points here, though. Progression occurs through these stages one at a time. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Let me go backwards one step. So the post-conventional level, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back, and I am going to talk about this real quick. So in stage 5, morality becomes internal, not internalized through others. Maintaining order takes a back seat to individual rights. So for instance, segregation laws, right? They maintained order, right? We had black schools and we had white schools. We had black water fountains and white water fountains and certain seats on the bus and all that whole nonsense back in, the 50s. So it maintained order, but it totally infringed on the individual rights of the minority class. And so eventually we kind of looked and we went, oh, yeah, that's morally, that's wrong. We're treating them differently, right? And that's for any marginalized group, right? Gays, women back in those days. We can't marginalize one group and disparage the other, to advance one. So that doesn't work. So we had to kind of reach a post-conventional level of thinking to where, right is right despite what anybody else thinks, right? Even if we have to go against what the law is, in this case, that's warranted. I mean, sometimes, and that's the reason that we have civil wars, right? People rise up against laws that they consider to be outdated and now immoral. How does the government have any right to tell two people that are in love that they're not allowed to get married just because they're both men, right? Or they're both women. So, we rise up, we fight against it, we lobby, and we get that changed. And we like to think we have advanced morally as a society. Now, of course, other people would argue the other way around, right? We have lost our morals, and now everybody does whatever the heck they want. So there's an argument to be made. This is a very philosophical chapter, and usually, we can have like a big, long back and forth discussion in class about that, which is the one drawback of this online format is we kind of lose that. So this is a much more talking point chapter. It's not so much point by point, learn all the steps. I don't really care so much about that. It's just, read through this a little bit and see, what you think of the different levels. Here's the interesting points, though. Moral development tends to lag behind cognitive development. So in other words, you learn how to reason and think and deduce logically before you start applying that to moral development, because moral development is much more abstract. So you learn to formulate your argument based on pros and cons and consequences and things like that. And then after that, you start to apply sort of a moral standard to it. So they occur usually in that order. This is very controversial. So Kohlberg maintained that women tend to peak at stage 3. Stage 3 is this one, right here. Men peak at stage 4. Of course, most people look back at Kohlberg. Did I have the dates there? I don't think I had any dates for him, so I'm not 100% sure when this time frame was, but it was certainly in a much more misogynistic area, right, where women were sort of second-class citizens to men. There was the whole gender norm of women are at home cooking and cleaning, and men are out there working their butts off, and so men were the ones that were solving the problem. They were the ones operating the government. They were the ones operating the CEO and the upper echelon ranks of businesses. And so they were faced with these moral decisions on a daily basis. And so, of course, they had the exposure to be able to advance to the next stage. Whereas women, they get married young, they have babies, they spend most of their time at home raising the kids and maintaining the house. They're simply not faced with these questions of moral judgment, so they don't advance. So I understand where he was coming from. It was kind of a product of his time, but of course now we don't really like thinking that men are more advanced than women and morally or anything like that, and it's certainly not the case. So this pretty much blows his whole moral development out of the water. But I do like sort of how he delineates the different stages to some extent. There is a difference between moral reasoning and moral behavior. You can think morally but not behave such. Lots of hypocrites out of there that men that will have all these. I don't want you to have any male friends, or don't be friends with your exes. I don't want anything to happen. Rekindling old flames or anything like that. But then yet they have their friends that are female, or exes that are on their Facebook or Instagram or whatever, and they think to themselves, well, they rationalize. Remember we talked about the defense mechanisms? I'm telling you to do this, but I'm doing the opposite because I can handle it. I know this isn't going to go anywhere, but I don't trust that for you it won't. So there's definitely a difference between moral reasoning and moral behavior. So you can be on one level thinking wise, but your behavior might not quite be on that same level. Um, let's see. So there's this kind of famous philosophical question. It's called the pharmacy dilemma, I think is what it's called. So the question is this. This is an ethical question. You live in a small town. There's only one pharmacy. Your wife is terminally ill with some kind of really bad cancer, whatever it is, and there's one medication that eases all of her pain, but it's very expensive. And the pharmacist finds out that you are in need of it, and so he doubles the price. So you go to get it, and he says, well, that pill cost me $50 a bottle. I'll sell it to you for $100. And you don't have $100. You have $50, but you don't have $100. And so you say, well, I'm trying to get this for my wife, and I can pay you $50, or I can pay you $75, and you still make a profit, and she still gets her pills, but I simply don't have $100. And he says, well, sorry, not going to give it to you. Bye. Kicks you out. So then later that night, you break in, you take the medicine, and you leave $75 on the counter, and you go give her the medicine. Who is right and who is wrong? And some would argue that stealing is wrong, and so you breaking in and stealing is wrong. Other people would argue, well, but you didn't steal it, you bought it, you left money, and he was wrong for jacking the price up. And so you go back and forth about who is right and who is wrong. And what you tend to see is people on different moral stages of development, right? Some people that say, well, I mean, sometimes the needs of the few outweigh the needs of the many. And then sometimes people say, no, the needs of the many always outweigh the needs of the few. So again, very philosophical conversation, interesting stuff. Unfortunately, doesn't translate very well to online. So, all right. So just be aware that moral development, that was kind of Kohlberg's thing. And let's talk about Erik Erikson. Now, I think his parents must be awesome, because if your last name is Erikson and then you name your kid Erik Erikson, that sounds like a comic book name, right? Bruce Banner, Peter Parker, right? It's got that alliteration going on. I love that. I'm going to make this bigger, so bye for a minute. All right, let's talk about this. I can pretty much do this is several chapters, by the way, in the lifespan class. So several chapters worth of information here, all in one infographic. So Erik Erikson was a neo-Freudian, right? He believed in the psychosocial development that occurred in these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different crises that you have to face in your development, right? From infant to older adult. So the way that this infographic is, right? Here's the name of the conflict. Basic trust versus basic mistrust. The next one is autonomy versus shame and doubt. The next one is initiative versus guilt, and so on and so forth. And then here's your ages right here, right? Pictures of the kids. So the first stage that we are faced with in our development is, do I trust this person or do I not trust this person? Because essentially infants have to trust that they will be cared for, right? They can't feed themselves. They can't, as my son, they can't feed themselves. They can't do anything, right? They 100% cannot survive without a caregiver. So caregivers there, right? They need to know that when they cry, mom will come running and change their diaper or give them food or rock them to sleep or, pat their back and get rid of their gas, whatever it might be, right? So if they cry and they get their need met, then they will learn to trust. And they will then develop this right here. They will develop a drive to move forward in life and hope that people are good, right? Now, what if you don't navigate this very well? What if the person doesn't come running and changing your diaper, or doesn't give you food or care or take care of whatever your need is, right? So you cry and cry and cry. Eventually you will get to the point where through classical conditioning that you understand crying does nothing, right? Crying does not generate any kind of response, so I'm not going to do it. So you will have infants that will lay there starving, that will lay there dirty, and all that. You might get a little whimpering, but the crying will definitely ease to some extent, right? It'll subside to a much more, tolerable, not ear-piercing scream, right? Because they realize that's just a waste of time. And they will, according to Erickson, develop a basic mistrust of people. They will basically never really trust anybody to care for them, or basically people are just not trustworthy. And that happens here, and they carry that through the rest of their life. They'll have trust issues their entire life. Now, remember, that's a very psychoanalytic way of thinking, right? That we are driven by our unconscious thoughts, and that we learn things in our developmental years that we carry all the way into adulthood, and sometimes we don't even realize it. So this is a very Freudian way of thinking. So the next stage is the autonomy versus shame and doubt. This is that toddler stage. This is what I call the I do it stage. If you've ever been around a toddler, right, what you'll hear that, and the first couple times it's absolutely adorable, and after a while you begin to absolutely hate that phrase. I do it. I do it. You need to get out the door, you need to go run errands, whatever. You're trying to put shoes on, you're trying to tie their shoes. That's a hard enough thing to do, right? Tying those little bitty tiny shoes. And they want to do it. And so you have two choices as a parent. You can either develop patience somehow, and you can say, okay, and you can let them try for a while, and you can assist them through it. You're going to be late. Or you can go, no, I'll do it. And so you just always do it for them because you're impatient or because, whatever. This is the child struggling with autonomy, right? Getting away a little bit from this infant that can't do anything for themselves. Right now you're starting to learn to do some things for yourself. And if you, as a parent, if you encourage this, then your child will develop self-control and willpower. If you're constantly, no, let me do it. No, let me do it. They start to develop a sense of shame because they feel like they're not good enough to do it, right? You don't let them. And they start to doubt their abilities. All right, so this hugely important stage, very, very difficult for parents to have that patience to let them try and fail, and that's okay. And that's the other thing, right? Trying and failing is okay. There needs to be a sense of encouragement and education where you can make them know it's okay to fail. You don't have to get it right. The fact that you tried is something. It's a very difficult thing to, like, for instance, tie your shoes. So you're not going to get it on the first try around, but you came close. So you're building their confidence so that they don't fall into this shame and doubt, because this, again, you'll carry for the rest of your life, right? You don't navigate this toddler phase very well, you will be a very kind of ashamed person, which will probably lead you to be very much introverted. You'll have a lot of self-doubts. You'll probably have a lot of anxiety, and you'll carry this throughout the rest of your life. The next one is initiative versus guilt. This is the preschooler age, right? This is where, at this point, they start to initiate their own activities. I want to draw, I want to color, I want to read a book, I want to do whatever. And if you let them explore that, then they have initiative. You're teaching them initiative. I want to do this thing, so I'm going to go do it. Now, if you're one of those parents that's like, no, I don't want you to paint right now. It makes too much of a mess, and I don't want to have to clean all that up. No, I don't want you to get your Legos out, because then I have to go around and pick them all up, and I don't want to step on any of them. No, I don't want to do... And there's parents that are like this, by the way. Then they start to feel a sense of guilt, because they want something. Their id is telling them do this, but then you don't let them. So they're unable to satisfy that id. And remember what we talked about, right? The id being unsatisfied, the ego unable to find an appropriate way to satisfy that id. They will start to develop
feelings of anxiety and guilt. So you want to be patient and you want to encourage this initiative so that the child grows up and has direction and purpose. Now we get to school age. School age is industry versus inferiority. This is where they start to learn that they are competent in comparison with their peers, right? So they get to school, and now this is a lot of parent-driven behavior in these three stages, right? Parent pretty much deciding whether or not these three stages are navigated properly. Now we're getting away from that. Not that parents aren't still important here, because they certainly are, but this is where the child is going to school and the class is given an assignment and everybody is diligently working quietly at their desk, sitting in their chair properly. They bring the right materials to the class. They're working towards whatever their assignment is. And they look around and they see that they are able to compete with their class and do well, right? So if that's the case and they successfully navigate this, they develop a sense of industry where they feel this competence. And if not, they look around and they're behind the class, or they're the only ones that's always in trouble for talking because they just can't seem to sit still. So, you have your children that struggle here with learning disorders or attention deficit, things like that. They start to question their sense of industry. They start to feel a sense of inferiority. I'm not as good as my peers because I can't sit still or whatever. So can be important. All right, this, in my opinion, one of the hardest stages. Not that any of them are easy, but I feel like this one, a lot of people get these first four, relatively well, and this is kind of where it goes sideways, right? Adolescent, those years are just terrible. So in this particular phase, right, they have this monumental task of determining their identity separate from these four phases, right? So in this phase, you're whatever mommy and daddy tell you. In this phase, you're growing up to be mommy and daddy, mommy and daddy, mommy and daddy, right? You're a mama's boy, you're a daddy's girl, whatever. You're growing up the way your parents tell you to grow up until you get to a certain age in adolescence where you decide, I can't just be under the thumb of my parents for the rest of my life and let them make all my decisions. I need to make my own decisions of what to wear, how to wear my hair, how to talk, what music to listen to. And that's when you start seeing all of the rebellion that is strictly that. It is just rebellion against your parents. You are determined to blaze your own path, listen to your own music, dress your own way, and that's why every generation has kind of their words and their music, right? We might grow up listening to our parents' music until we get to roughly this age, and then we want to listen to the opposite. So, my dad listened to classic rock. That's all he ever listened to. And so I grew up, and next thing you know, I'm listening to pop. That was kind of the big thing in the 80s and maybe early 90s, and then grunge. And that was fun, right? Grunge to my parents was horrible. And so it made me like it even more. Nirvana, it didn't get any better than Nirvana, right? And then there was a little more like metal stuff that was coming out, right? And I kind of dabbled with some of that just a little bit. I remember Ozzy Osbourne, his first album was like a big deal. And I probably didn't even really like it. I just liked the fact that my parents hated it. So now it's mostly rap, right? My son listens to, Drake and all that. I freaking hate it. I don't allow it whenever he's with me. I'm like, no, you're not listening to that crap here. So, but I think the more I hate it, the more it's just going to drive him towards it. So, that's just adolescent behavior, right? They're struggling to find their sense of identity. Now, if they find it, then good for them. They find this devotion and fidelity, right? That's what Erickson says you gain. If not, then you have role confusion, right? I still am the child of my parent. I still need them for guidance and help, but I don't want that. I want to be my own person. And so they end up with this role confusion. Maybe you're very conservative, but they grow up and they want to go the other way. Or maybe you, like my kids, right, grow up in a super religious household. What happens to a lot of kids like that? Whenever they get off to college, they completely abandon their faith, right? Not because they never believed it to begin with, but because that is the rebellious act, right? That is the way I'm going to find my own identity, is I'm going to walk away from my faith because it's always been pushed on me by my parents. And what happens a lot of times, they find their way back to it at a slightly older age, right? They get past the rebellion, they establish their own identity, and then they go back to the religion that they were raised on, but now it's their own, right? So you see that a lot. So this stage right here, I think, is the toughest one. It's the biggest change, in my opinion. All right, then we get to the last three stages quickly. Young adult, right? At this stage, you're usually looking for your relationship, your serious relationships, right? Of course, you're dating probably here, but now you're looking at serious relationships, marriages, and whatnot. So if you find it, right, then you have intimacy, and if not, then you have this sense of isolation where maybe you're not good enough or there's something wrong with you. You learn affiliation and love in this stage. This is a very important one for just happiness and well-being. By the time you get to middle age, you start thinking about other people a little bit more. At this point, probably married, probably kids, probably career. You're probably pretty solid financially if you're your average American, right? House, picket fence, all that kind of stuff, right? So now you're kind of at a place where you don't have to focus on yourself as much. And so what happens, especially after you have kids, I truly believe that having kids makes you much more selfless. I have always been a probably selfish person until I had kids. Here, I'm going to shrink this down since we're pretty much done. I feel like I'm talking to nobody. Even though I can't see you, there's something about this that makes it like a conversation. So anyways, man, I don't know how many times that I have gone fast food place or whatever with a girlfriend. I'm like, do you want anything? And they say no. And so I order, or maybe they say yes, give me nuggets. Okay, do you want the meal? No, I just want 10-piece or 6-piece nuggets. That's all I want. Okay, cool. So I order mine, and then they're like, can I have some fries? No. You had your opportunity. I asked you if you wanted fries. You said no, so you don't get to eat mine. That's not how that works. If you wanted fries, you should have ordered fries. Is that selfish? Probably. Is there logic behind it? I think. Look, it's not that I'm being selfish. I offered you, I'll buy you a large fry. I'll buy you 2 large fries. But you said no, so I didn't. But I want fries. I don't want half fries, right? I got large, and I want to eat all of those fries. I don't want to share with you. So, but I had kids, and they'll do that. And no, I don't want the fries. I just want, and they'll be like, Daddy, can I have a fry? I don't think twice. Here you go, baby. Here you go. You really want all my fries? All right, here you go. Never in my life did anybody convince me that I would ever be that way until you have kids. And then you, well, I think if you're a decent father or mother, it just comes natural. I mean, I would give my children my last penny. I would give them the shirt off my back. I mean, anything that they were wanting for, I would go without so that they could have. I mean, I can't imagine not thinking that way. And that's kind of a clue about this middle. It sucks to say this, but that's middle age, right? This generativity. Wait, generativity. Yeah, I said it right. Generativity, right? It's that being generous. Look, I've had a good life. I have stuff. I'm comfortable. And now I'm starting to think about you. This is where people start doing like community work and volunteer work and things like that. They want to start giving back, right? They've got all this behind them, and now they want to give back a little bit. So you properly navigate this, right? You successfully do that, right? You start having a sense of productivity, these core values that you care about people, things like that. If not, stagnation. That's when you start going, what meaning does my life have, right? This is your midlife crisis, right? Where you revert back a lot of times to an earlier age and go buy, convertible or something like that, right? And then finally here, this older adult, and this is ego, integrity versus despair. This is where you reflect back on your life and you ask yourself, did I live a good life? I just actually recently watched Saving Private Ryan. By the way, if you haven't seen that, you need to watch. It's one of the best movies of all time. I love that movie. So at the beginning of the movie, this old guy is going to a cemetery in Arlington, And he kneels down in front of a cross, and then the movie happens basically as kind of a flashback for him. And then at the end, he's just crying profusely, and he asks his wife, "Am I a good person? Did I lead a good life?" Um, that is the perfect. That's the epitome of this particular phase, right? You look back at a life lived, and you either are proud of what you've done and who you've become, or you're not so proud. You look back at the mistakes that you made that went uncorrected, for instance, and you have a sense of despair. And the statistics will say, apparently, wherever you look, that depression amongst the elderly is actually no different than depression in any other age category. I absolutely can't wrap my head around that because I feel like in our society anyway, elderly have a disproportionately high depression rate. I, I, I just feel like that's the case because I think we treat our elderly horrible in this country. Hispanics are much better at it, right? They still hold the elderly in high regard. They care for their parents, and forever, right? Asians are even better, right? The older you are, the wiser and the more revered you are, and it doesn't go away with the old. Again, the older you are, the more high esteem that you're held in. In America, we're like, oh God, my dad's sick and has this. I'm gonna stick him in a home. Like we're terrible. We're the worst. Um, but I'm watching this right now with my father, and it's interesting, not in a good kind of interesting, but he's been a chain smoker his whole life, 3 packs a day, and it just drives everybody around him away. I don't want to be anywhere. I don't want to be within 6 feet of him because he stinks. He smells like an ashtray all the time. I hate it. I don't want him to touch me because his hands are gross. So I haven't hugged my dad or shaken his hand 20 years. I'll still go over there and hang out for 30 minutes every couple of weeks, maybe. But he wants to talk on the back porch while he's smoking, and I don't want to be around it. So I'll go inside and talk to my mom and hang out with her. And meanwhile, Dad's like, he can't stop smoking long enough to come inside and say hi. And even when he does, he needs to be across the room, or I'll make him an excuse to leave. So, I know he's addicted, and I've never struggled with an addiction, so I can't judge. I know it's tough, but he's starting to get really, really depressed that nobody likes me, nobody wants to hang around with me, and I don't even have a relationship with my grandkids. They don't even want to hug me. And I've told him, like, Dad, if you took a shower and then didn't smoke, and then the kids came over and you smelled zestfully clean, they'd run up and hug you. They are very hugging children, but they don't want to hug you because you stink. Sorry, but you do. I know you can't smell it on yourself, but it's horrible. Matter of fact, I was over there last week, and they had gone and gotten fajitas the night before, and they had a bunch of leftovers, and they're like, "Do you want them?" And I'm like, I'm going to say no to fajitas? Yeah. So I'm sitting there eating them, and it was, oh God, they were so good. And he went outside, and he came back in, and he sat next to me at the dinner table, and I'm like, oh God. I mean, I can't eat, and that smell is right there, right? So anyway, I ended up throwing them away because I couldn't deal with it or whatever. And then he was like, "Oh, you didn't want them?" And I'm like, "Dad, I don't want to hurt your feelings. Yes, I was enjoying the hell out of these. It's the best meal I've had in 3 weeks, but I can't eat with you sitting next to me, and I taste like I'm eating a cigarette, and I can't deal with that." Well, because I'll just go back outside. So anyways, yeah, this is a sad thing, that I'm kind of going through right now with my dad. But I really, really like this. As you can tell, I spent a lot of time on it. But I think these stages are very intuitive. I think you can kind of relate thinking back to maybe not these early ones, right? But I've seen this in my child. I've seen this in my child. I've seen all of these. Starting to see this one a little bit. I've experienced these, myself. So I can go back all the way to at least probably all the way back to here and remember and kind of think through then go, yeah, I did kind of struggle with that. And hopefully I came out on the proper side of these things. But anyway, this is Erickson's theory of psychosocial development, these 8 crisis stages. So have a relative understanding of those. Moving on, this is just definitions. I'm just going to speed through these. You can read these on your own. Prenatal development is development from conception to birth, and then we go to the next stage. So that's the question, by the way. I'm just going to give it away. Is what are the stages? So First, it's prenatal, right, from conception to birth. Zygote is a cell that results in the union of a sperm and an ovum. So this is conception to 2 weeks. Then we go to embryo, different terminology. This signifies sort of a different developmental phase. And this is week 3 to 8. And then from week 9 to birth is fetus. So we go zygote, embryo, fetus. And then, of course, babies are born, right? So then I guess you have baby. Actually, it goes from there. It goes to neonate. That's a newborn infant up to 1 month, and then baby. So let's see. So an embryo is a developing human organism with the major systems, organs, and structures of the body begin to develop. So if you look at an embryo from week 3 to 8, you're going to start to see certain major systems develop. Now, do they work? No. Are they fully developed? No. So they start to develop in this embryonic phase, okay? At this point, I don't know, all the books always talk about teratogens. They just really like that word, so I'll throw it out here. Embryos are very susceptible to what's called teratogens. Teratogens are any environmental toxin that can cause birth defects. So smoking can cause birth defects. That's why they tell pregnant women don't smoke. Mercury, which is sometimes prevalent in certain kinds of fish. They tell pregnant women don't eat a lot of fish or any fish. Lead paint can be an issue. Of course, alcohol, right? Alcohol would be a teratogen because it causes fetal alcohol syndrome where babies are born very, very small and sometimes prematurely. So, or just lack of prenatal care, that can be very detrimental to an embryo, right? That's why they usually put pregnant women on all kinds of prenatal vitamins and, certain eat this, don't eat that, all that kind of stuff. So the embryonic phase, obviously, right, we're growing organs, kind of an important part. Don't put cancer causing, chemicals into your body. Don't be breathing in toxins, things like that. I remember I went to Hawaii for the first time when I was married. It was kind of a late honeymoon, I guess. And we've been married for like 3 years, so it was pretty late. But she was 6 months pregnant, and I came across a special deal to fly in a helicopter over the volcanoes and look down, and there was one that was active at the time. So I thought, oh my God, how awesome is that? Never been in a helicopter at that point, and never seen a volcano at that point, and to see one from a helicopter, heck yeah, sign me up. And the guy said, "Oh yeah, there's a lot of sulfur and stuff in the air. I don't know if she wants to go being pregnant. I mean, it's up to y'all. I'll take you." And I was like, "Yeah, I don't want my baby born with 3 heads or something weird. So yeah, maybe we just skip that." So I had to pass that opportunity, which probably will never happen again. But sacrifices to have a normal kid, right? So let's see. Fetus is the next stage. That's developing human organism through the period of rapid growth and further development. This is where the organs and systems further develop. Some of them begin to sort of work in a rudimentary way, but basically it's just a continuation of development. All right, where am I at? Right here. So I mentioned this one. Neonate is the term for a newborn infant up to a month old. You'll know that from hospitals, right? They have neonatal care. Or the NICU. That's what that stands for, the neonate NICU, ICU, intensive care unit. Neonate intensive care unit. That's the NICU. So a low birth weight baby is any baby that weighs less than 5.5 pounds. 5.5 pounds is considered sort of the target weight. Anything above that is very healthy. Anything below that is a low birth weight baby that could be more susceptible to issues after birth. Autoimmune disorders, malnourishment, things like that. A preterm infant is any infant that's born before the 37th week and weighs less than 5.5 pounds. Typically, you're not going to be born in week 36 and weigh 6 pounds, right? They're just not that developed yet. So usually you're going to have both of these being met if you're born before the 37th week. Let's see, reflexes I've talked about already. They're built-in responses to certain stimuli that neonates need in order to survive their new world. Sucking, swallowing, rooting, all of these are reflexes. Evolutionary psychologists will tell you that they are from evolutionary times, right? So one of the things that happens when you throw a baby up in the air, They sprawl out, their hands and their legs, their hands open, their arms widen, their legs widen. Why? Why do babies do that, right? What causes that fear reaction that makes that happen? Well, environmental psychologists will say that it comes from the fact that we evolved from apes, or monkeys, and that when monkeys would fall asleep, and they would often sleep up in the trees to be away from predators, and then whenever they fall asleep and then fall off of a limb in their sleep, they would then extend their limbs in order to catch whatever branch comes by quick enough that they can save themselves. And that is something that's just in our DNA and has been passed on for a million years or so until babies do that when you throw them in the air. Do you believe that? I don't know. I don't put a lot of thought into it, but it's interesting. I guess if you're not an evolutionist, then you won't believe that. But yeah, so there are certain things that are just built-in responses. They're not learned. They're just built in. It's kind of how we're wired and what we do. Temperament is kind of an interesting thing. It's a person's behavioral style. Different people have different temperaments. I apparently was a very easy baby, according to my mom. I very rarely cried. I played by myself easily. I didn't have a problem with strangers or kind of attachment disorders or anything like that. I've always been kind of a loner that was fine on my own, doing my own thing. My daughter, very much an easy kid. She can play with her Barbie doll house for hours and be perfectly well happy with that. My son's he's easy as well, but he is a little less easy as far as length of time. He can't entertain himself for that long. He can play Xbox until friggin' all hours of the night. But before Xbox, I mean, when he was playing with toys more often, he did well. He could entertain himself. He didn't cry much. I actually felt like I got cheated as a parent a little bit because you see all the movies, you're getting woken up in the middle of the night, having to pat and rock your baby to sleep. And I bought this really expensive rocking chair thing to have in the baby's room. I never got to use it. Put him down, sleep through the night, go back the next morning and wake him up. It's like, well, I feel like I should be doing more, but I don't feel like I'm required to do anything else. So I love the fact that I had easy children, but again, there would be those times where they would be high maintenance for whatever reason, and I'm like, now I'm earning my keep, right? So easy children are about 40%. Generally, they're pleasant in mood, easily adaptable to new situations, and they fall into easy patterns of eating, sleeping, and potty training. Pretty good. That's a pretty high proportion, right? 40%. Difficult children are only about 10%, and they are the opposite of all of these things. They are not easily adaptable to new situations. They are not pleasant in mood. They colicky, they cry all the time, and then it's hard to get them to eat, sleep. Everything is difficult, right? Thank God I didn't have that. I think a lot of people that, I wonder if a lot of single people that don't, what's the word? Single children? Is that the word? Only child. That's what I'm trying to think of. A lot of only children. I wonder if they were difficult, and parents are like, nope, not doing that again. I don't know. Anyway, slow to warm up is another category. It's about 15% that are withdrawn and they're somewhat negative in mood. These are just like your cranky kids, not necessarily, unadaptable and the patterns and all that kind of stuff, but they're just cranky. They do fall into these patterns, but just like the name implies, right? They're a little slow to fall into them. The remaining 35 are just inconsistent. They're kind of all over the place. Sometimes they're easy, sometimes they're hard. They don't neatly fall into a category. So, just kind of different ways to look at temperament. This is strongly influenced by heredity. As I said, I was an easy child. I had easy children. I was an easy child. My brother apparently was a little less easy. He was more of the slow to warm up, but still definitely not difficult. And pretty much, I'd say easy kid. So there's a hereditary influence there. Excuse me. And it's relatively predictive of personality in adulthood. I find that interesting. So I was an easy kid. I'm a pretty laid back guy, right? Not a lot of times are you an easy child and then grow up as a difficult adult, right? But what about life circumstances, right? I was an easy child. Well, I mean, life is easier. You're a child, right? You have no bills, no responsibility, right? You're provided for, everything. So it's easy to be an easy child as long as your needs are being met, right? Well, what happens whenever you get to be an adult and you lose your job and you get divorced and, this happens and that happens, the financial struggles and all that? Is it possible to go from being an easy child to a difficult adult? Yeah, I think it's possible. Um, but generally speaking, just looking statistically across the board, if you have kind of a pleasant upbringing, right? Again, all your needs are met. You probably fall into a pattern of school comes easy for you or relatively easy. So because of that, you find a career, you do well in that career because you've always been kind of easy to get along with or whatever. And so you advance in that career and you're financially set. So unless something happens like a car accident or you lose your health because of it, or you I don't know, get falsely accused of a crime and you have a criminal record or something like that, then yes, it is possible for your temperament to change. Depression causes a change in temperament, in men especially, it causes anger. So this is true, but I would put a little asterisk there with some small print underneath it that yes, it is influenced by heredity and is relatively predictive, but that relatively word should probably be bolded. All right, attachment. This is interesting. Attachment is a strong, affectionate bond that a child forms with their mother or their primary caregiver. There was a scientist named Harry Harlow that did a very famous study. Here's a picture of it. This is I believe this is a Reese monkey, and he had these two contraptions. This one over here, obviously you can see it's just made of metal, just metal mesh. And inside this, right, there was kind of like what they have for hamsters that like provided milk, right? So this one provides actual nourishment, food, right? Now this one has got like this terry cloth covering, and I think some of them had like a little heater, so it put off just a little bit of heat, and some of them had like a little thump 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 to like simulate a heartbeat, but it did not provide any nourishment. And the question was, this is a fascinating thing to think about as a question to even ask, but then to devise this experiment was just genius. The question is, which one, if the monkey can only have one, right, which one is he going to gravitate to? The one that provides sort of comfort, or the one that basically keeps it alive, right? This one feeds you, and without it, you will die. You could live without the hugging and the warmth, and all. I mean, you're not freezing to death, right? This is not providing a warmth of that nature. This is a very comfortable, temperature-wise environment, and that added warmth is just that, it feels like when you get a towel out of the dryer, right? It's like, that's warm, and that feels good, but you can live without it, right? Surprisingly, the monkeys all chose this one. So, what does that say about physical attachment, right? Is it a want or is it a need? Pretty much everybody agrees that it is a need. The need to physically bond, to be held for whatever reason, we have that. Now, these mothers that don't form this emotional attachment, that also don't pick up their baby and rock them, and there's something called kangaroo care where you go shirtless and baby goes shirtless and you're skin to skin, and it is the best feeling in the world. I don't care if that sounds unmanly to say in our society, but laying there with my son or daughter when they were an infant and just being skin to skin and feeling their heartbeat and them feeling mine and them just falling asleep on you, there is no better feeling in the world. I will never feel that feeling again because they're too old for that now. And it's sad. It's almost sad to think that I will never enjoy that feeling again, because it is better than any drug. It's better than any accomplishment I've ever done in my life. It is the best feeling in the world. That closeness that you feel. So I can't imagine these people that don't share that. That's so sad to me. But anyway, this level of attachment was found by Harry Harlow. Separation anxiety is the fear and distress shown by a toddler when the parent leaves, occurring from 8 to 24 months, which is normal. It reaches a peak around 12 to 18 months. So this feeling of anxiety whenever mom leaves, their caregiver leaves, is very, very normal up to about 2 years. After that, can become a little bit of an issue, and we'll touch on that in another chapter. Mary Ainsworth, she is the attachment guru. She's the big kind of queen of this. So she devised these. This is like the Freud's latency stage. She actually devised 3 categories: secure, avoidant attachment, and resistant attachment. After she did this, there was a 4th attachment type that was assigned by other researchers, which is called, it was a catch-all, just disorganized. They don't really neatly fall into any category, so this is going to be the other ones. So again, not to be a trick question, but Mary Ainsworth actually only had 3. But a lot of times you'll read Mary Ainsworth's 4 attachment styles, and then this one, because they're keeping her name on her theory, but then they've added to her theory. So it's really not her theory anymore. It's an addition to her theory. So I hate that they do that. So let's go through this real quick. Secure attachment, you'll be happy to know this is 65%, the vast majority of infants. They are securely attached to their caregiver. There is some discomfort when mom leaves the room, but they will seek her out if she's gone for too long. They will explore as long as mom is nearby. They'll crawl over here and check out that thing on the rug and then crawl right back. But they need mom close by, and close proximity is like a safe base, right? Like that's my base of operation. Everything is safe when I'm there. I can venture out a little ways, but not too far, and come right back. They tend to display more advanced social skills. They're more responsive, more obedient, more cooperative, and they're comfortable with a stranger when mom is present. The avoidant attachments, these are the really sad ones. 20% of infants completely unconcerned about mother's presence or absence. Like they're ambivalent, right? If mom's here, great. If she's not, fine. I don't care. Whatever. They're completely comfortable with strangers. That might sound like a good thing, but do you want your kid to be comfortable with just any stranger and have no anxiety whatsoever, no stranger danger feeling whatsoever? So Chester the molester can come up and just say, hey, you want some candy, and get in my van? And they're like, sure, whatever. Of course not, right? We don't want that for our children, right? So 20%, kind of a high, scary number. 10 to 15%, these are the weird ones to me. So they seek and they prefer close contact with their mother, but this is almost like an over need, right? So they do not branch out and explore, right? They won't go out and sort of safely explore that because they're afraid to leave mom. Now the interesting thing, and I don't have the list. I don't have the list. So the list of what she did, she had like a checklist of what she would do. She would go into a room with this baby, with mom and baby, and observe the interaction, and then she would leave, and they would see what the baby would do, and then she would come back, and then they would see what the baby would do, and then a stranger would come in with mom, and they would see what the baby did, and then mom would leave and leave stranger there, and they would see what the baby did, and then mom would come back again. So there's like this, all these back and forths, and then everything was monitored, right? And the resistant attachment children do not explore when mom is not in the room. And interestingly, when mom leaves, they cry and freak out. When they come back, they're mad. They lash out at mom, like hitting her sometimes, because instead of being, oh, I'm so happy that you're back, it's like, I'm mad at you for putting me through that. So kind of interesting, right? They're pretty aggressive kids. And then, of course, there's this disorganized, like I said before, this is 5 to 10%, and there's kind of a mixture of responses kind of all over the place. So Mary Ainsworth has this attachment theories. No, there's secure, avoidant, and resistant. All right, last thing in the chapter is parenting styles. It's actually my favorite part of the chapter, but I feel like I've been talking a long time, so I'm going to unfortunately go through this kind of quickly. So socialization is the process of learning socially acceptable behaviors, attitudes, and values. We're all socialized differently, different values, different attitudes, different levels of conscientiousness, if you will. So that's kind of just a definition there. I want to talk about 3 different parenting styles really quickly. I hate that 2 of them sound very similar. I wish they came up with a different name, right? So there's authoritarian parents. Authoritarian parents are my parents. And I'm not trying to bash my parents, by the way. I talk to my mom almost every day. My dad a little less now, but still. I've always had a fairly close relationship, although I disagree with most of what my parents say and do. I still have a close relationship with them.
Authoritarian parents are parents who make arbitrary rules, right? Bedtime is 8 o'clock. Why 8? Why not 8:30? Why not 9? Why not 6? Right? That's an arbitrary rule. If you can't tell me why it exists, it's arbitrary. Now, if you said your bedtime is 8 o'clock because when you stay up till 9 o'clock, I have trouble waking you up in the morning, then it's no longer an arbitrary rule. There's a necessity behind it. So that makes sense. Okay? But whenever my bed is at 8 o'clock and I want to stay up till 9 and you let me do it and I get up just fine, then my bedtime should be moved to 9 o'clock. And then you say, no, 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 it's 8 o'clock. That's arbitrary. So parents who make arbitrary rules expect unquestioned obedience from their parents. So where does that put you as a child, right? Communication is all one way. Do this because I said so. But why? I'm young and I'm curious to how the world works. And I would like an explanation as to why I need to write this rule in my superego rule book. So can you please explain to me why this is necessary? And what do you get? Because I said so. I absolutely despise that phrase. I hate that phrase more than almost any other phrase in the English language. I vowed never once would I utter that phrase to my children, and I'm proud to say I never have. So I tell my kids, what time to go to bed, or stop playing your Xbox, I need you to do this, I need you to do that, and they say why, like normal children, and I actually explain to them why. And they don't always agree, and they'll sometimes argue, and I absolutely hate to give credit to my ex-wife for anything because I really hate her as a human being. But I'm going to give her credit for this one phrase. She would engage in the same sort of parenting, not authoritarian parenting, but the better kind that we'll get to. And my kids would go, but why I want this? And she would say, well, because blah, 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 blah. And they said, but why I want this? So there's a difference between explaining and just arguing, right? Sometimes you can explain it. They may not agree with it, but at least you're planting a seed. And later they'll think about it when the emotions pass and they'll go, yeah, that kind of does make sense, right? It might not be for years, but at some point you've planted that seed of knowledge, and at some point they're like, okay, yeah, I understand that now. But there gets to a point where after that seed's been planted, they're not grasping it right now. They're not going to. They're on a different stage of development, right? They're not to that place where they can abstractly think. So you're not really going to explain it to them that in a way that makes sense. And so you got to just cut it off, right? You can't just argue. And so she would, when it got to that point, she would say, I'm sorry, I love you too much to argue with you. Which sounds like a hokey thing to say, but I'll be damned if it didn't work every time. They'd be like, they want to continue arguing, but you just said I love you. And they would go, but I love you too. So there's that conditioned response, right? I'm a parent, I say I love you, and then you say I love you too. So there's that back and forth. So when you're like, but, and then I say I love you, you're like, I love you too. And it just like takes the wind out of your sails, and like there's no more argument after that. It's like, I'm mad at you because I'm not getting what I want, but you're reiterating to me that you love me, and I'm telling you back that I love you too, and now it seems weird to argue anymore. So again, that phrase worked. I have to give it to her for coining it, but I loved that. So never thought I would be because I said so parent. I'm a big fan of explaining and taking the time to explain patiently. Parents that raise their children in an authoritarian, because I said so household, typically are very distant, right? You can't have an emotional attachment to a parent that doesn't ever explain anything to you. They're somewhat unresponsive. They're somewhat uncommunicative, which makes sense, right? Because you're not allowed to communicate with the parent. The parent is telling you what to do, and you don't get any say-so in it. So you're literally being taught not to communicate. So they don't. Children tend to be withdrawn, somewhat anxious, and of course unhappy. Now, my parents' generation of parenting, this was just how it was done. I mean, you didn't ask your kid's opinion about anything. They're a kid, right? Like, you do what you're told, be seen and not heard. That's kind of the old adage, right? This seems to be somewhat beneficial in low-income households, probably for the same reason that this style of leadership is still prevalent in the military, right? There's a chain of command, and you don't question it. And when you're given an order, you follow it. Why? Well, because when you're in the heat of battle and you're given an order, you just do it. You don't have a democratic debate on what the right thing to do is. You just follow orders.
that's kind of the normal way to do. So in low income households where you've got, mom maybe working 3 jobs and, no dad in the picture or whatever, and then you come home, you simply don't have the time or the energy or the patience to explain why everything needs to be followed. So it's somewhat beneficial for just energy efficiency to be like, do this. I expect to know when I'm home, and then that's the end of the discussion. So you do still see this sort of parenting style. I absolutely just despise it. This is the better alternative. This is authoritative. Now, again, I told you that I hate that authoritarian and authoritative, super similar words, right? So I don't know how to tell you to differentiate one from the other, but don't get them mixed up. So authoritative parents usually set high but realistic standards, right? That's important. You want to challenge your kids to strive for the best. Um, I didn't have this kind of parenting, but it's interesting that somewhere along the way I became this, and my brother did not. Um, I will never forget my brother's first semester of college. He had one class that was kind of like this one. He had 4 exams, and that was your grade. And he took the first 3, and he called me and he goes, "Hey, I got a question. What do I have to get on the 4th exam in order to get a 70 in the class?" And I was like, "Why? Why do you need to know that?" "Well, I mean, I don't want to put a bunch of effort and get like 100 on this test, and I end up with like an 89, or I could just, not study and get like a 70 and I end up with an 80. I mean, a B is a B, your GPA is the same." And while that's technically accurate, I don't understand that mentality. Now, so I told him, I'm not going to help you with that. My advice to you is go in, study, and do the best that you can. And everything you do, you should always strive to do it well. Why would you ever set a low bar for yourself? Why would you ever half-ass anything? And, if you can't do it well, you shouldn't do it at all. So you figure it out. And the fact that you have to ask me how to do that basic math tells me that maybe college is not right for you anyway. So anyway, he bombed it and flunked out. So he joined the military. By the way, he did not know how to swim. I guess he's always kind of been in my shadow just a little bit. So I was on the swim team for like 9 years, and I was all state and all that kind of stuff. It was pretty good. So there was a period where I thought about joining the Navy and trying out for the SEALs. Right, I met a guy who was a former SEAL, and he kind of turned me on to it. And I thought it was like the big Arnold Schwarzenegger guys that were Navy SEAls, and he's like, those guys wash out in the first week. I mean, they're big and they're muscular, but you can't do what we do built like that. You're carrying too much muscle, requires too much oxygen, there's too much cardiovascular stuff. They can't keep up. People with good cardio are the people that do well, and you being a swimmer, you actually would have, the only drawback is you're too tall. You're 6'2", right? And that's pretty tall for a SEAL. Most SEALs are a little shorter than that, right? Again, kind of the same issue with how much weight you carry just walking around, So anyways, point being, I wanted to be a Navy SEAL. I decided to pursue other things, so I never went that way. Well, he decided to live out that dream, and so he signed up for the Navy and joined to be a rescue swimmer, which would then lead to possibly being selected for BUDS or Navy SEALs. And the difference between him and I is he did not know how to swim. So he signed up to be a rescue swimmer, which is considered a special forces position, and did not know how to swim. So they said, in the PT, they were like, PT is physical training. They said, all right, you need to do, I don't know the number, I'm going to make it up. You need to do 50 push-ups, and you have 2 minutes to do as many as you can. But the minimum passing is 50. Ready, set, go. So he's 1, 2, 3, 4, gets to whatever, 48, 49, 50. And the guy with the stopwatch goes, you still have 40 seconds, or however long, right? I don't know how much it was. And he was like, no, I'm good. And time. I got news for you, buddy. You did 48. 2 of those didn't count because you didn't go down far enough, so you failed. So that's what happens whenever you set a low bar. So they said, okay, so you have 2 minutes to rest and recover, and then we're going to do it again. Well, now he's tired. He just did 50 push-ups, right? So gets to go again. He struggles a little bit, 48, 49, 50. And the guy goes, you have 10 more seconds. No, I'm done. Well, that time he did 49. You didn't go all the way down on 1, so I'm not going to count it. So you failed. You're now out of the program, and we're going to make you a cook. So he lasted about another 2 months and was booted out of the Navy for not adjusting psychologically to military life. So he got an other than honorable discharge and was booted out. Why? Because he sets low standards. Okay, so but that's a reflection of the parenting, right? The parenting, we never were challenged by our parents to set high standards for ourselves. Um, I did that on my own, and I'll get into why I went one direction, he went the other a little later in another chapter. But um, I was always seeking that affirmation from parents. I wanted that pat on the back. I wanted somebody to say you did a good job, which by the way I've never gotten ever. But so that's why it's important to me. Like every once in a while, somebody will email me. They're like, "Oh, I really enjoyed that lecture, or whatever," and I'm like, "Oh, you don't understand the itch that you're scratching that I've had for like 40 years, right? That compliments, just it's a big deal." So that's the reason that I set high standards, is because I feel like if I win, if I'm the top person in my field, which often I am, then somebody will say something nice. That words of affirmation, just super important in my life. My brother went the other way. Grew up without it, doesn't think much of it. So sometimes whenever you don't have something, you either grow up really, really wanting that thing that you didn't grow up with, or you just get used to not having it, and you're used to not having it. So um, anyway, these parents reason with their children. Again, I'm a big fan of reasoning, but not to the point where we're negotiating. I will explain to you. I will try to give you my reasoning, and if you don't agree with it, I'm sorry that you don't agree with it, but that's the way that it is. I mean, it's still somewhat one way as far as directives, but the communication is absolutely two way. Enforcing limits, encouraging open communication and independence. Parents tend to be warm, nurturing, supportive, and respectful towards their children. Children grow up, this is all research, by the way, this is not my opinion, this is all heavily researched. Children grow up to be more mature, happier, self reliant, self controlled, more assertive, they're socially competent, and more responsible. Everything out there says this style of parenting is what works. Okay, the authoritarian parenting, lots of cons. Some pros, not many, lots of cons. Um, Also, higher academic performance, independence, self-esteem, internalized more standards. This is an older picture back before I got LASIK and I had to wear glasses, and my kids are pretty young. This is my daughter. I took this beautiful picture of her, and I was bragging about how pretty she is and everything. And she's like, "Daddy, will you take one more pretty picture?" And I was like, "Absolutely, baby." And I was like, 1, 2, and then bam, fingers up the nose, and that's the picture I got. It's one of my favorite pictures. Anyways, last style of parenting is permissive parenting. And this is broken down into 2 styles. Parents who make few rules or demands and they allow their children to make their own decisions and control their own behavior. I'm glad I can talk about this now, right? Girlfriend's not home right now. Her daughter is, though. She's 15 and she sucks. Um, this is the kind of parent that girlfriend is. Um, there's 2 different types. There's the permissive indulgent. They're warm and supportive. They'll say, "I love you," and things like that. But they believe that being permissive is, if if I have to put my foot down and tell you to do this or to do that or ground you or whatever, then you're not going to love me anymore. And you're going to be mad at me, and I don't want to deal with that. So basically, it's the parent kissing the child's butt. Um, just a couple of examples of that. When we first started dating, she was 12. Stepdaughter was 12. And we went to Target one time, and her 12-year-old, we walk in the door, and daughter, she walks 20 steps ahead of us everywhere we go. Never with us, always in front, way in front, and just goes off. And I said, "Where's she going?" And she goes, "I don't know." "What do you mean you don't know? You're a mom." Yeah, did she ask? Did she say, "Mom, can I go look at toys or something like that?" And she goes, "No." So she just gets to go wherever she wants to go, and she's running the show. She's like, "Well, no, but I mean, we're gonna go over here to buy groceries. She doesn't need to be there with us doing that." That's permissive parenting, right? So then, I started pointing out, as a cop, I'm like, that's not safe. I mean, we don't live in an environment anymore where that is a particularly okay thing to do at 12. Maybe she's a little older. Maybe she's a little more assertive. A little smarter, like knew how to handle emergency situations, maybe. But I don't think she would know the first thing to do if some stranger came up to her and started being inappropriate. So I definitely think you need her on a much shorter leash than that. But she was always afraid. I don't want to piss her off. I don't want to make her mad, blah, blah, blah. So let's read this. Children tend to be the most immature, very impulsive, and dependent because they don't really know how to, they've never really been taught anything. So they are always dependent on mom, right? They are the least self controlled and self reliant. Yeah, pretty much all around. So I have introduced one chore: take out the trash. That's it. Take out the trash. If you see that it's half full or more, take it out. And that includes the bathroom. There's a little tiny one in the laundry room. There's like three little ones in like the bathrooms, the laundry room, and then the kitchen trash. And in 2 years, she still can't do it. Still can't remember to take it out. Take it out to the street. Pull the trash can back in from the street without constant reminders. It's ridiculous to me. So talk about responsibility. I mean, how do they learn responsibility if you don't teach them? And if you're not ever teaching them anything because you're too afraid to lose their affection, well, then you're essentially not parenting. And that is a feral child that's raising themselves. And how do you think that's going to turn out? So the worst kind of parenting is the second one here. That's the permissive, neglectful. That's the one that they don't even say I love you. They're just basically like, yeah, you live here and I live here. You're like roommates with your own child. No warmth, no interest in supporting them, anything they do. You don't ask them about their day. You don't ask them what's going on in their life. You don't, nothing like that, right? They just exist. And, they're lucky if you throw food their way every once in a while. Children in this category are associated with drinking problems, promiscuous sex, delinquent behavior, and poor academic performance. Basically, they're messed up. They're messed up in every possible way. Psychologically, emotionally, every possible way you can be messed up. This messes you up pretty bad. So, these are your three options of parenting. Both permissive styles suck. Authoritarian parents get the job done. I mean, essentially it gets the job done, but it's not particularly good. So strive for authoritative parents. Okay, that's that chapter. That's everything there. I don't remember the last three chapters of this section are. I think one of them is memory. One of them I think is health and stress, and I forget the other one. So anyways, I know the health chapter is shorter. The memory chapter is shorter than this. And again, I forget that third one. I think it might be social. And the social psych chapter is a fun chapter. And you'll definitely have to watch the lecture for that one because it's mostly just pictures. So, but it's a fun chapter. So we'll see you guys on the next one. So